Hello and welcome to the channel. You're watching Collab Crush. This is Daniel Ball and this is the third video, lesson 3, the third video in a series I'm doing on the Cisco Meeting Server. So today we're going to be going over the initial configurations for setting up CMS. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, if you recall from lesson 1, we talked about the services that are available on the Cisco Meeting Server, and I'm not going to cover them again here. So if you're just now tuning in with this lesson and you want to know more about them, then you can back up and watch lesson 1. But what I want to emphasize here, starting out, because we're talking about initial configurations for deploying CMS. So what I want to point out is that, out of the box, CMS can't really do anything. All of the services that run on the back end are disabled, and you not only have to enable those services in order to use them, you have to stand them up with certificates so that they can function properly. Because security is a prerequisite to being able to set up and use CMS. So understanding this, especially CallBridge and WebBridge, these are probably the most important services you'll enable. So understanding this is important, okay? Now, another important aspect of Cisco Meeting Server that you need to understand is that the Cisco Meeting Server is built with 2 layers. They have what's called a platform layer and an application layer. Okay, so let's talk about the platform layer first. The platform layer is available in both a virtualized deployment or on an appliance server deployment, okay? And either one is fine, but there are some important differences between these. So let's talk about that. Now, the appliance server has a physical interface. Think of this like a console interface. It's called an admin interface, and you use this admin interface to initially stand up your Cisco meeting server. And that's so you can console into it and assign an IP address, a subnet mask, default gateway, etc. Right? So that you can do those initial settings on your server. And then you can use one of your other 4 interfaces, A, B, C, or D, for all of your other functions and actions. That's the way it communicates on the network, is through one of these other interfaces. But the admin interface is used specifically to console into the system to set it up for the first time. And that's because it's a bare metal installation of CMS on a server. Just like, with your computer or the way we used to set up servers before everything went virtualized with VMs and so forth, okay? Now, if we're talking about a virtualized deployment, we don't need an admin interface, because if we're building a virtualized environment within that virtualized environment, such as VMware ESXi, you have a console action within this software. ESXi in this example, you have a console action within this software to be able to initially set up this information, right? And you could call that on Virtual Interface A or ESXi Console. But either way, that's how you're going to set up your initial settings. Okay, so this is your platform layer. Your platform layer is that back end. They call it the MMP. It's your back end connection to initially set up your server. And this includes enabling all of your services, setting up certificates, and so forth. Okay? Then you have what's called your application layer. And just like with the platform layer, it runs on both a virtualized and appliance server deployment. And this runs all of your management settings, your meeting management, and so forth. This can be accessed through the web interface, and the application layer can also run on any one of the 4 main physical Ethernet connection interfaces, A, B, C, or D. Okay, so if you choose to use a VM, let's talk about how you would set that up. And I'm assuming here that you're using VMware ESXi. So what you want to do is log into ESXi, and then, of course, at the top of your screen, you'd want to choose File, New, OVF file. And then once you do that, it'll bring up a screen that looks something like this. And then you'll want to click this Browse button and then select the appropriate OVF file, and then just click Next at the bottom of your screen. Now that's going to give you an identification screen that looks something like this, and it may say Econo server instead of Cisco, and that's fine. Econo is the company that Cisco bought CMS from. So you're just confirming the information here, and if everything looks okay, then you'll click Next. And then it'll prompt you for a name, and it'll give you a default name, but if you want to rename it here, then you can do that. And then you just hit Next. And then here you're choosing the data store where you want to build this partition, as well as the amount of space that you want to allocate for this virtual machine. And at the bottom here, the provisioning level you want to use. Now, for lab purposes, Cisco recommends that you choose thin provisioning. That's if you're building a lab and that's all you're going to use it for, nothing else. However, if it's for a production environment, Cisco recommends instead that you select thick provisioning lazy zeroed. Okay, then you'll click Next, and you'll get this confirmation screen that shows what you've configured for your VM. And when you click Save, ESXi will go ahead and start building that VM for you. Now, it's at this point we could call it Step 6. Step 6 is where we're probably going to start in the labs. The VM will already be built, but that's it. It's built, it's running, but there won't be anything else. So after it builds the VM and starts up, you can't access the server until you configure the network information. So to do that, the first thing you'll have to do so that Cisco Meeting Server is accessible across the network is you have to assign IP information to it. Now, remember we said that there are 4 interfaces on the Cisco Meeting Server. There's A, B, C, and D. So as you begin to configure these network settings and as you begin to enable services, you have to identify which interface you're going to use, A, B, C, or D. And you do this by putting in the command iface. Iface is for interface, right? So I can say iface A, iface B, or iface C, whichever interface you're going to work with. And if I type just iface A and hit enter, it's going to show me some of my network connection parameters for this interface. Now, if you want to change the speed and duplex of that interface, you could do this a couple of different ways. One, you would first want to type iface A. That's, again, that's the interface that you're configuring. And then you put in the speed and duplex here, in this case 1000, and then full duplex. Or if the switch you're connected to allows for auto-negotiating speed and duplex, you could just type in iface A and then auto-neg for auto-negotiation, and then on if you want to turn it on. And if you decided instead that you wanted to turn that off and manually configure it, then you could do that. It's off by default. Okay, so that's possible too. Okay, and then to assign an IP address, okay, so you have to decide if you're going to use IPv4 or IPv6. And so for this example, we're going to use IPv4. So you type in IPv4A and then add, because we're going to add it here, and then you'd put in the IP address, whatever that is, and then slash, and then your CIDR mask. Instead of having to put in 255.255.255/0, you'd put in just /24, okay? And then you'll need a space and then your default gateway, okay? And then once you hit enter, that configuration is committed to your Cisco Meeting Server, and you don't have to reboot it or anything. You're ready to go. So you can then open up PuTTY, and you can select SSH, put in your IP address, and then you can go into your Cisco Meeting Server. So, this way, you don't have to use the console port with ESXi anymore. You can just close that out. Okay, but another command that you might put in is assigning your DNS address. Now you can do DNS, add, and then forward zone altogether, and then type in a domain and then an IP address, and then you're all set. And you can also do NTP server. NTP server, add, and then put in an IP address for an NTP server. And in fact, you can add up to 4 NTP server addresses into a Cisco Meeting Server. Cisco recommends that you add at least 2, and we'll be doing that in the lab as well. Okay, so this is how you configure your initial settings on the MMP for the Cisco Meeting Server. Okay, so we've built our VM, right? And then we've configured the network settings, just now. So the next step in that process would be to install certificates. And then after installing certificates, that's when you can start enabling your services. So when you go through these next two steps, certificates and enabling services, there are actually two different methods that you can use. You can use the installation assistant method or the traditional method through MMP. Or another way to put it is the easy way or the hard way. And you might be thinking that, of course, the best option is to choose the easy way, but there are reasons why you might want to choose the hard way instead, or perhaps reasons why you are required that you must choose the hard way. Okay, because with the installation assistant, you have to keep in mind that it's only for very basic installs. If you ever plan to configure more than the call bridge and the web bridge, then you don't want to use the installation assistant. And also, once the installation assistant has set up CMS, it uses the API to configure many of the settings. So the web interface can't be used to change those settings later on. They'd have to be changed through the API. The installation assistant also cannot be used to set up the recording and streaming service if you wanted to use that. Nor could it be used to implement any branding or customization options if you wanted to use those as well. Okay, so depending on your situation and your plans and how you want to set everything up, you might have some very good reasons for choosing the hard way. So again, the next step is to create certificates, and no matter which method you use, the easy way or the hard way, either way, the sort of high-level process for creating the certificates is the same. So let's talk about that process. Now, the first thing you'll do is create what's called a CSR, which is a certificate signing request. And then you take that CSR and you run it through a certificate server to get it signed. And then once it's signed, you'd load that signed certificate back on your Cisco Meeting Server, okay? So either way, if you use the easy way or the hard way, this sort of high-level process for generating certificates is going to be the same. So let's talk about if we were going to do this the hard way, if we were going to use the more difficult process for doing this. So if you choose that route, or if you are forced to choose this option, remember the first step is to generate your CSRs. And for that, there's a command that you have to put in your Cisco Meeting Server in order to sign your certificates. So that command is PKI space CSR, and then you'd want to give a name to your certificate. So for example, if we use the name webadmin, this results in two files, webadmin.key and webadmin.csr. Now, some people like to add other attributes. These are the different attributes that you're allowed to add to a certificate signing request on a Cisco Meeting Server. You can see in this example, I've added common name, organizational unit, organization, locality, and state. And these are all optional. They're not required. The only thing that is required for the certificate is, of course, the name. Of course, you have to give it a base name. So as you can see from this example, if you want to add any of these attributes, you just add the initials for the attribute you want to add, and then a colon, and then the value for that attribute. All of this after you've entered the required base name. If any of the values that you want to add have a space in them, then you have to enter it using quotation marks. So here, for example, for organization, you can see that collab learning is entered with quotes because, of course, there's a space. Now, for this, it's best to just use an underscore here instead of a space, but you could use a space if you wanted to. So once you've generated your CSRs, those CSRs exist on the Cisco Meeting Server. So you then have to extract that data so that you can take it and use it within your certificate server, okay, to sign those certificates. So the tool that you'd want to use for that, of course, is an FTP client. In this example here, I'm using FileZilla, but of course you can use whatever FTP client that you prefer. For example, WinFTP is just fine. So you just want to type in sftp:// and then the IP address of your Cisco Meeting Server. Of course, you'll need to enter the username and password and then connect. And then everything you see on the right side is from the Cisco Meeting Server, and then on the left here are the files on your local computer. So then you just want to select the CSR file and move it to your computer. And then once it's on your computer, you'll want to open it up and copy the entire contents of that file. Now, it's going to begin and end with a bunch of dashes, and it may seem like it's just a bunch of unnecessary characters there, but you want to copy everything, every single character. Okay, and then you'll want to go into your certificate server. Now, in this example, I'm using a Windows certificate server, which, by the way, is what I'm going to be using when we do the lab. At any rate, you're going to go into your certificate server, and first, you're going to click on Request a Certificate. And then in number 2 here, you want to click Submit a Certificate Request, etc. And then when you do this, a field is going to pop up as shown in number 3. And inside this text area, this is where you're going to paste your CSR that you copied in the previous slide. And then you just need to select the template you're going to use and then click Submit. Okay, so that will sign your certificate. And so now that you have a signed certificate, all you have to do is download it. And there's 2 different ways that you can do this. You can sign it as a DER, or you can sign it as base64 encoded. Now, the difference is that DER is an encoded method, meaning that the contents of the certificate are also encoded. And your server, whatever you're using, if you're using a DER certificate, it has to have a key to be able to decode the information and read the data, to validate your certificate. Base64 is still a secure option, and it's a little more straightforward, so we're just going to go with that. Okay, now downloading the certificate isn't enough because on your server you not only need your signed certificate, you'll also need some way to point to an authority that signed the certificate in the first place. So we have to download something called a root CA, which is your root certificate authority. And to do that, it's very straightforward. To do that, well, it's hard to see here in step 5, but in step 5, you will just want to click Home, and that's going to take you back to the same screen that we were in, the beginning step in the beginning screen in step 1, except that instead of clicking on Request a Certificate like we did in the first step, instead, what we'd want to do is click Download a CA certificate, certificate chain, etc., etc. And then again, make sure you select base64. It needs to be the same here. And then download CA certificate. Okay, and then after you download it, it's probably a good idea to give it a new name. I generally just like to rename it as root CA. That's what it is. Just something different from the signed certificate that we created earlier so that you can tell the difference. And then you'll want to go back into your FTP client. Okay, once you're back in your FTP client, you'll want to locate the 2 files, the root CA and the signed certificate, and you'll want to take these certificates and drag them back over to your Cisco Meeting Server. And now they're going to be ready to use to enable your services. So that's a lot of work. That's a lot of steps that we have to go through just to get the signed certificates. We haven't even turned on the services yet. So it's a lot of work involved there. Okay, so then we're now ready to enable our services. And in the Cisco Meeting Server, there are a series of commands that you have to enter for each service that you want to enable. So to do this, you first need to establish an SSH connection to the MMP and sign in, and then you'll enter the commands. Now, this example here shows how we'd enable the web admin service. Remember, the web admin service is a service that allows you to access the web interface. So I'm going to type in web admin certs because I have to associate certificates with the service. So it's the service name and then certs. And then I want to name my key, and then I want to name my certificate. Okay, and then next you have to identify the interface and listening port that you're using for this service. So in this case, it's web admin listen space A space 443. Then if this is the first time that you've enabled this service, then you type in the name of the service, again webadmin, and then enable. But also if you've ever make a change to an existing service, for example, if I wanted to run, if I set this up and then I wanted to run it on a different port number, maybe I changed it from 443 to 445. So if I did that, after I had made the change, I just want to type in webadmin and then restart, and then that would restart the service. Okay? So then after you run these commands, your services should be running. And so in this example, you'd want to log into the web interface, just for no other reason than to just test, to make sure that you can access the service and that it's running normally. And in this case, as long as you're getting the login splash screen, you'd know that the service is up and running. Okay, so that is an overview of the hard way of setting up your certificates and starting your services. But again, there is an easy way to go through these steps. So going back, let's say after you've built your VM and you've configured the network settings, then you're ready to let's say you're ready to set up your certificates and you're ready to start your services, but you're going to do things the easy way. You would do that by using the installation assistant. And this is what I'm going to demo in the lab, by the way. But remember, the installation assistant has limitations. It's only used for very basic installs. So you need to think carefully about whether this option would be right for your situation. Okay, if it is the right choice for you, then setup is going to be infinitely easier. And as you can see over here on the left-hand menu, it's not just going to walk you through setting up your certificates. It'll also walk you through licensing. In network, it'll walk you through configuring your network settings like hostname, NTP server, DNS, etc. You can configure CallBridge. You can enable and use the Cisco Meeting app web client. And with WebBridge, you can configure WebBridge 2 or WebBridge 3. It'll take you through either one to support using the Cisco Meeting app web client. And then Conference User has to do with LDAP integrations, so it'll walk you through how to set up LDAP integrations, their security, and then this last step, it walks you through the configuration, before sending to the meeting server to complete the configuration process. So overall, a much easier method. Okay, that's it for Lesson 3, setting up your initial configurations for the Cisco Meeting Server. In the next video, we're going to start doing labs, so I hope you'll stay tuned for that. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.